For more than 400 years, people have reported observing large, hairy-covered ape-like creatures throughout North America. One of the oldest recorded sightings came from Leif Erikson in 986 AD during one of his first landings in the New World. He wrote about monsters that were very ugly, hairy, swarthy, and had big black eyes. The Indian tribes of British Columbia called the creature Sasquatch, which meant wild man of the woods. Even President Teddy Roosevelt wrote about his personal encounter in 1892 in his book, The Wilderness Hunter. In 1967, Roger Patterson and Robert Gimlin filmed a creature in Bluff Creek, California, that has become one of the most controversial films of all time. A film that has undergone years of scrutiny, and to this day has still not been proven fake. The Patterson-Gimlin film paved the way for many new explorers and free thinkers. Movies like The Legend of Boggy Creek and Harry and the Hendersons, TV shows like Leonard Nimoy's In Search of and Animal Planet's Finding Bigfoot have all inspired a new age of exploration. But where does myth end and reality begin? Given the amount of evidence collected from around the world, as well as a wide range of first-hand accounts and personal stories, some may argue that the legend of Bigfoot should no longer be considered a creature of myth, but instead, a creature of reality. Hello everybody, I'm Kevin Patrick and I am here at the 2017 Ohio Bigfoot Conference with Lyle Blackburn. He is an author, a musician, and a Bigfoot enthusiast. Lyle, thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks a lot.
What I wanted to ask you about was, you're a Texas guy. How did you get into Bigfooting, first of all?
Well, I think it was just something in my blood from an early age. You know, I just loved the subject of cryptids, unexplained creatures. You know, initially, of course, Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest, Loch Ness Monster, and I would read those sort of books as a kid. Later on, sometime in the 70s, my parents took me to a drive-in movie to see The Legend of Boggy Creek, and that took place in southern Arkansas, maybe about 3 hours from where I live in Texas. So that really hit it home for me, and to think that a creature like this could live in the proximity of my own state really cemented my love. And later on, as I was an adult, looked at this more seriously and became something of a writer. I loved the subject of Legend of Boggy Creek, and so ended up writing a book on the history of that.
Can you tell me anything about your first encounter, or when you started going out? What was that one time that was like, I'm hooked, I know this is real, this is something I want to further look into? Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things when you first go, you're almost like thinking at any second you could see something. You're almost overlooking, and then as you relax and go into the areas, especially where people have told me of encounters. I've been interviewed hundreds of people that have had these sorts of encounters, so there's something to it. There's something out there. For me personally, there was an incident several years ago in which we were on a bayou, and myself and another friend of mine, we hear this howl. And we hear it 3 times, and you could tell that it wasn't anything normal. It wasn't a coyote or the normal sort of creatures we had heard over the years. And, I grew up hunting with my father, so I'm quite at home in the woods. It was probably about 200 yards away. Then later, as we ended up going back down the bayou and going to our camp, about the time we got there, whatever this was, it suddenly was across the bayou channel, and we hear it again in this very eerie howl coming up, which, the hair on the back of your neck stands up, and you're thinking, we couldn't see anything over there, but, potentially you're in a proximity to a creature that, very few people have seen.
Other people that go out there and have encounters like this sometimes are afraid to come forward and even tell their story. What would you recommend to them as far as getting their story out if they're a little bit shy in telling it?
Well, I think, nowadays it's much more acceptable to say you've seen something like Bigfoot or something unexplained. I mean, years ago, you had a reputation. People would think you're crazy. I mean, people were much more reluctant. But I think now if you do have this sort of experience, it's not hard to find somebody to report it to. I mean, of course, with finding Bigfoot on Animal Planet has raised awareness for the BFRO. You could file a report there, or there's numerous organizations in individual states that specialize in Bigfoot reports there. And if you report it to these people, they're not going to think you're crazy whatsoever. They're going to investigate and look at it seriously and keep your name anonymous. They're very respectful. If you report one to me, I'm not announcing it on the news. I'm looking into this and respecting people's personal experience. So, I would say just look for someone in your area to report it to and get some advice on what it is you've seen,
Now, how do you deal with skeptics? I mean, I'm sure that you've come across many people that have questioned your research and what you do, and there's people out there that just don't want to deal with that. How do you handle that, and what would you say to somebody as far as ammunition for possibly getting into a conversation with a potential skeptic?
Well, I think first you have to identify with those people, and it's understandable that people are skeptical. And most knowledge that they have, generally is kind of a pop culture version of Bigfoot. It's funny. I've seen Harry and the Hendersons. It's that sort of thing. So you just kind of have to identify with saying, yeah, I totally understand. It sounds improbable, and you want to be rational in your thinking, but let me tell you about a couple of things that you probably don't know about. Things that aren't in the news, things that are something that somebody who's looked into this subject for a long period of time can kind of tell you a few things that you would say, okay, well that's interesting. Maybe there is more to this. So I think you can't just try to sell somebody on it, sure, believe it, because you got to understand that people are going to come at it skeptically and sort of just, I don't know, get them in the water slowly. Don't just dump them in the deep end.
Sure, absolutely. If you were trapped in an elevator with somebody, a skeptic per se, and had just 30 seconds to try to convince them of the evidence that's out there, what would your main hit or points be as far as trying to convince them as there's something out there?
Yeah, that's a tough one because there is so much that I've looked into over the years. I would just say that you have to forget about the pop culture version. You have to look at things like there are footprints that have been found that have been analyzed by anatomists and FBI fingerprint experts who cannot explain what these are. They've had dermal ridges. They're primate-like. They're footprints of an enormous proportion. You've had things like that. You have the witness sightings over the years of very credible people. Not just people think it's all crackpots. They're not. There's everybody from doctors to biologists to photographers to everyday people who have seen this. So, that would be what I say. Don't think that it's the sightings are by crazy people.
Lyle, how do we at home get a hold of you or look into what you're doing and your research and what you've got going on here?
Well, you can start at my website, Lyle Blackburn, Lyle Blackburn.com, and that's got links to everything. I'm primarily an author and have written several books on cryptozoology and Bigfoot. And so if you go to my website, you can find out what I've got going. You can find my books on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, places like that.
Hi, we're back. I just want to introduce everybody to Mr. Robert Robinson. He's an author and also a Bigfoot enthusiast. Thank you, Robert, for doing this interview.
Hey, it's a pleasure. Hey, thank you for doing this.
First of all, I want to start off. You were a former service member, aren't you?
Yes, I was. I served in the United States Army as a military policeman for 21 years.
Well, thank you for your service. I really appreciate that, sir. Now, Robert, I have to ask, what first got you into Bigfooting?
I would say if I was to pinpoint the exact moment, it would be the Legend of Boggy Creek movie, like a lot of other people. I saw it. I didn't know anything about it. The movie scared me coming home. In fact, it left an impression on me. We went to a double feature at the drive-in, and I don't even remember what the second movie was. That's how much the movie scared me. But I started, I went to school, I was talking about it, and the teacher said, there's books about similar creatures called Bigfoot. So I started researching, I started reading the books, and I stopped being scared, and I got interested in it. And I found there was more books on Ivan T. Sanderson and John Keel, and I just I loved it. I just loved reading about that stuff. So, I had to do book reports at school. I would go grab one of those books, guaranteed A in my book report, because I was. But then I went to high school. A little bit. I remember taking friends of mine over to Missouri to go look for Momo, and we didn't really plan that one out too well. We ended up having to sleep in the car. Didn't realize it was going to be that far of a trip. But anyway, went to the military. Didn't get to really pursue cryptozoology or legend tripping so much because, the Army keeps you kind of busy. But I was able to read about it and keep up on it. Well, retired in 2003 to Florida, me and my beautiful wife. And I took on I got a job as JRTC instructor. But I found I had the time to actually go out and do it. So I hooked up with BRFO. They had some expeditions going on in Florida. Hooked up with them, started going out. Met a couple other people that did it, and it just started growing. My wife, she had an interest in ghost hunting, so I went out ghost hunting with her. So she came out Bigfoot hunting with me. I went out ghost hunting with her, and we brought our kids with us, because to get them away from the video games and the TV. And it just kind of progressed, and we heard about the term legend tripping, which encompasses all that stuff. So we started calling ourselves legend trippers, and we've been doing it ever since.
In your book, you had mentioned that there's a section in there where you talk about interviewing potential witnesses to Bigfoot. I'm assuming that in your career at some point in the military as a military police, you've had some sort of training on how to interview and potentially interrogate potential suspects.
Well, witness or the person that committed the offense. We have to, especially, we read them the rights and they decide they want to make a statement. So, the door's open. So we go ahead and have them do statements. We have them do their statement. Then we go back and we ask questions on the statements because, he waived his rights. He wants to talk. So it's basically the same thing. That's how I kind of treat it like I'm not going to say I treat every witness as a skeptic, but I always kind of listen intensely just to make sure they're not, it's one of those, or trying to hoax me or waste my time. I do notice that most people, in my experience, that I do believe that they have saw something they can't explain, get very emotional. Especially females. They break out crying and all this stuff. Then again, I've had some guys break out crying on me too. But I like to question them about 3 times, especially if I don't think they're telling me the truth. Because sooner or later, the second or third time, I can nail them on their story if they're not telling me the truth.
Now, I'm assuming that you regularly do interviews with witnesses quite often. About how many have you been doing, or how often do you do a year or a month?
Gosh, I don't know. That's a good question.
A lot?
It has been a lot. When I've been hooking up with the Sasquatch hunters, we've actually had some witnesses come out, and I'll listen to the stories. I mostly stand in the background like I'm not paying attention, and then I'll go back up to the person and say, tell me that again, Okay, tell me again. And, I had one person that, he could tell me everything that happened all 3 times without a glitch in his story. And I believe he saw something that he couldn't explain.
Now, for your average person that just goes out on a hike in the woods, if they have an encounter or an experience, what do you recommend to them, especially nowadays with the potential of being harassed about seeing a Bigfoot? Well, how would you handle that?
Here's a story. I drove into a gas station one time with my Jeep. Drove these boys in a big old pickup, about 4 of them, country boys. Anyway, they got in there and they looked over and they saw the Jeep with the Bigfoot. And he goes, you look for Bigfoot. There ain't no such, there ain't no such thing as no skunk ape. One boy, I think he was the driver, leaned over and goes, yes, there is. My dad saw it. The boys all just stopped right there and they went, what? I said, yeah, my daddy saw it. Oh, okay. Yeah, and they looked at me and they looked at the guy and stopped right there. With with the popularity of the shows and some of the stuff going on, I think more and more people are actually coming out now and talking about it. Yeah, there were some times that some people didn't want to get ridiculed, but I think with the shows showing and that some people, okay, I'm not the only one who's seeing this thing, so maybe I should go talk about it and stuff.
And all the reports seem to be somewhat similar description. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct. People think for some reason in Florida that Bigfoot is only 6 foot or smaller. That's not true. He is actually 8 foot and above. It's just that some of the reports are of maybe possibly a juvenile Bigfoot.
Now, most people are thinking about Sasquatch being in the Pacific Northwest. Are they anywhere else?
Well, according to what I've been, my research, they're all over the United States. The only place I know they're not is in Hawaii. I think something to this? Yeah. Because, we've actually had reports going on for a long time, but they went as like a wild man. And most people would just picture some feral man sitting out in the woods with just a loincloth and all that. They didn't really give it much thought back then. But now, they're starting to look into it, and they're looking at the report saying, wait a minute, that was a big hairy man. Maybe that wasn't just a guy in a loincloth running around the woods. So, we've had the reports. It's just now we're going back and re-looking at them and realizing, maybe we did have a Bigfoot versus a feral man, as I call it.
Now, with your research, have you had an encounter or anything that made you believe in Bigfoot? Something that was just like, hey, there is something to this.
Well, when I was up with we were doing in the Bridges property, and we had 2 of our gentlemen get growled at the night prior, and then we found the tracks the next morning, and I went, wow. We found tracks. Before I just see castings made, second generation prints, but to actually find them yourself and find really good distinct prints, I tell you, I said, wow, we really do got some squatches walking around this property right now.
If you get stuck in an elevator and you have 30 seconds to talk to a skeptic about the main speaking points of why Sasquatch potentially exists, what would they be? What would your 30 seconds be filled with?
30 seconds, here we go. There have been reports since the settlers first came here. We have footprints, we have hair. I realize that the whole DNA thing is on, but there's credible people, doctors, doctors. There are, like I said, there are people in the community that have never, with a very good reputation, seeing something, that know a difference between a bear and what they're seeing. These hunters here know a bear. And they've come over and they've told me, I said, yeah, we saw a bear over there. Well, this guy said, this wasn't no bear. This thing was running, not walking, running on 2 legs. Bears can walk on 2 legs. They can't run on 2 legs. So, how can all these people be seeing this thing? And you're trying to tell me it's not out there? Are all people just imagining it and we're all actually seeing bears that run on 2 legs? So
there's got to be a little bit more to this.
I believe there is. I believe there's a large primate-type creature in various parts of the United States, in the woods, the swamps, or whatever, making its home, trying very desperately to kind of keep itself, its pods intact without humans, coming in there and, killing them and stuff.
Really quick, how does our audience get a hold of you or see what you're doing here or even look into your research?
Well, I have a blog, Legend Trippers of America, and I also on Facebook, Robert Robinson, Legend Tripper. And I've been writing articles for Cryptid Culture and World Explorers magazine. But the best way to get a hold of me is, my blog, Legend Trippers of America.
Hi, everybody. I am here with Sonia at the 2017 Ohio Bigfoot Conference. Sonia, you're a very special guest here. Can you tell me a little bit about why and what you do?
Well, I'm a paranormal researcher by hobby, but I'm actually a well-known spiritualist in Ohio. I'm the ghost lady. I run Haunted Cleveland tours. I do ghost tours on Halloween, and my main job is to help people who are scared about the ghosts in their house or they have something really nasty that they need to get rid of. So I'm known as the lady that gets rid of the ghosts.
Kind of the original Ghostbuster.
Yeah, one of them.
One of them.
One of them. And in Ohio here, I had a Bigfoot encounter when I was 15 in Mohican State Park. And that's what sparked my interest. Like many people, enthusiasts, you get a flavor or something, or you get that adrenaline or something happens. You got to answer the question of what was that?
Can you tell us about your encounter?
My encounter when I was 15, or the most recent one that I actually seen with my eyes recently?
Let's start with the one when you were 15 and then move to the recent one.
Okay, if you do want to read the whole encounter, it's in Dina Palazzini's book, one of her books she wrote about. And I was listening to the Boy Scout leader talking to the campground owner about the Boy Scouts being harassed in the middle of the night. Backpacks were being gone through, something was poking at tents and was scaring the kids. And the owner said, "They're not going to bother you." He's like, "It's okay." And they're like, "No, we're out of here." So they said they're leaving. He goes, "No, the Bigfoots won't bother you." So I heard this and got a couple of kids together from the campgrounds. I was 15. We went looking for this thing, and I found tracks. And I found my first set of tracks, and I knew better to put my foot down. And I actually caught 2 tracks. Later that night, we went out when it was dark, and we heard something scream from across the woods. Now, in the 70s, at that time, 1978, there was reports of Bigfoots in Mohican and the Minerva area with cats in assistance of like pet cats or hunting cats. I don't know what they were. But we heard definitely what we thought were cat screams. Maybe it was a Bigfoot, but I was thinking it was cat screams. Something followed me back to the cabin. I really at first thought it was a big cat because they stalk you. Yeah. You know, and I'm 15. I'm thinking, I don't have a knife. I don't have nothing. I get to the cabin. Well, long story short, it ended up against the cabin. And it came up close. And when it did that, I did a little bit of the telepathic psychic, "Hey, or you, or you." And it got startled and fell into the cabin. And the wall of the cabin shook so hard that our bunk beds came off the walls, the wooden bunkhouse. And it put a wrinkle in the metal roof, and it got up and ran away. In the morning, and we were terrified. We woke up the girls up. I happened to be up because I knew that it followed me back. Never saw it, but I heard it run away. So I heard it. I saw the tracks. I felt it. The owner, Ken, had to come down. He goes, "What the heck?" And there was no tire tracks. It almost looked like a truck hit the side of the building. It was that damaged. It was really big and heavy. And it wasn't the horses. It wasn't like a horse, because you would have seen horse tracks. But it was a big, heavy boom in the side of the cabin. And then later on, jumped to 2013, I had another encounter in Mohican where there's a very steep area where the dam, it even says there's beware, this is a steep terrain, beware. And these people had these kids running around screaming and yelling, these little kids. In my mind, I was thinking, why would you let your little ones with these crevasses and deep cliffs, why would you let your kids? But I was thinking that. So we get to the area where we first start to walk in, and there's kind of a slope, and I'm known to have vertigo. I don't do well looking down on stuff. So I turned this way to face the rock wall to get through the area. And as I did that, I looked up to inch my way along the wall, and there was a Bigfoot looking down at me. And it was kind of on its arms, and it was looking over, and all the hair was hanging on. I didn't have any hair here, but all the hairs were hanging down, looking at me, and he went, I swear to God he did. So then I turned to my friend, "Oh my God, I saw a tree stump." Looked up, it was gone. It was that fast. And then I kept insisting that I think I just saw a tree stump. I think I just saw a tree stump. In the meantime, one of my friends who we were hiking with came tearing back at us, all excited. "Did you hear that running? Did you hear that big thing running?" I was like, "I just saw the tree stump. I just saw the Bigfoot." And it was a reddish brown. It was more of a juvenile because it wasn't like a huge 8-foot tall one. It was more like maybe my size. Okay. I couldn't tell any really features of it. I just remember the skin around the eyes, because when it was hanging down, the hair's hanging down, the perspective of it is like when you look up at somebody and their hairs are hanging down, they're looking down at you. And it was just brownish, reddish, and he looked surprised. So that's why everybody's here at the park, because we all get together. Probably 90% of the people here have seen something or have had something happen. And so I have a knowing. I've seen a Bigfoot. I know.
A lot of people that have encounters sometimes don't want to come forward or afraid to. Maybe people won't understand them. What would you recommend to somebody that might have had an encounter that is not sure whether or not to come forward and make a report or not? What would you recommend?
There is a way to make a report, and it can be anonymous. And the BFRO website, not that I'm affiliated with them, but it's a well-known nationwide, it's a base that you can go in and do it anonymously and make the report. Chances are there could be other reports. The problem with that is that then it's not credible, because if you're not allowed to be forthcoming and come and look and have it investigated, it's hard to believe somebody.
So essentially, the Ohio Bigfoot Convention is a place where somebody can feel welcome to share their story and be a part of something that they can't explain.
And we're all family, we all get along, and we're all mature people and little kids, and we get like the best people. But yeah, you can come and have a Bigfoot encounter. You could even anonymously call me and leave I do an anonymous report, but unless we can follow up on it, it's hard to put it in the record. Unless you can follow up on a report. But if people want to get it off their chest and be part of the psychological phenomena, how it feels to come and just be part of the group. Yes, I believe. Oh, good, somebody believes me. Oh, good, somebody, I get it now.
Now, for somebody that might not have ever had an encounter, but is willing to get out there and maybe do a little investigating on their own, what are some things that you would recommend to them? Good places to start or things to try?
Things to try. Food. They seem to be in Ohio attracted to our food. It doesn't mean that you should habitually really feed them a lot. I know that if you feed them a lot, and then you stop feeding them, they become aggressive. But yeah, food, picnics, barbecues, going to a picnic area in Salt Fork here and just hanging out, cooking stuff. Keep your eyes open.
Do they tend to be curious?
They tend to be curious. The smell, just like any big hairy man, they're attracted by, good food smells. Seriously, when you're hungry, food travels. I mean, it's good. I think cooking. There's your answer. Cooking. Get outside, do what you normally do. Because when you're out there trying to stalk them and hunt, they know hunting behavior. They're going to avoid people who are sneaking around the woods, and they're going to do it. You be a normal day-to-day activity, regular activity. Have a GoPro set up on you or a recorder set out. Because it's really hard to capture it with a camera. It's really tough to have that camera right there. So it's good if you have something ongoing, an ongoing
Absolutely
camera, and it helps. But the chances of having encounters go where the most reports are. Be familiar with the maps. Be familiar with what they're reporting on BFRO or other websites that are saying these encounters are happening. You might see a wave of, in October there's a lot over here, and in November they're over here, and in December. Because I'm a nerd, I get into it. I like to track where they're around Ohio.
Should anybody be afraid to come forward?
No, don't be afraid to come forward, because I believe, and until I saw one, I wasn't sure. It was maybe on the fringe of paranormal, which is unexplainable. But, I deal with ghosts, so anybody wants to come forward, there are people who could comfort them and commiserize with them, and, don't be afraid to speak up. You can come to a meeting and be anonymous. You don't even have to tell anybody your name. And just spill it out, get it out there. Of course, you're going to be asked a lot of 10 questions. But mostly I want to go out in the field and look where you said that happened.
Absolutely.
I'm after the most recent reports.
Now,
I'm not in this for the money. I'm not in this to get on TV over it. I'm not in this to be in the books. It's more of the psychological desire to understand what is it?
Absolutely. Finding out what it was you experienced.
It's almost like a trauma that I keep repeating over and over in my head what I saw, the fringy hair, the details of it, the nose, the skin, leathery skin here, and over and over, like every day, almost like a trauma or a car accident or a death or something you've experienced. You think about it over and over and over again.
How can we at home find out more about you, how to contact you, and what you do?
Well, I offer the ghost tours generally seasonally and on Halloween time. HauntedClevelandTours.com is my website. I also do tarot card parties. I also work cold cases. If anybody has, I don't charge for any of that. It's if anybody needs help with that, I do a lot of free help you out with psychic cases and things, especially cold cases. I enjoy detective type work, solving stuff. I love cemetery work and diving into that. Yeah. But yeah, get in touch with me. I also have a phone number 440-775-1217. I live in Oberlin, Ohio. I am accessible. You can call me.
Hi, everybody. I am here with a very special guest, Mr. Robert Morgan. He is an author and then also a Bigfoot enthusiast. Mr. Morgan, thank you, first of all, for having the interview with me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
You actually are the author of the very first Bigfoot book that I picked up and started getting into. So I'm actually very happy that you are doing this interview with us. So thank you. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
When did you get started in this hobby?
Well, it was just a matter of seeing something that I couldn't explain, and everyone that I talked to could not explain it until I met with some Native American friends of mine out west, and they laid it all out, and this is what you saw, and this is what happened, and that clicked it for me. A fellow by the name of Kai Nino Cochise, and he was the grandson of the Apache chief Cochise.
Can you tell me a little bit about your very first encounter of what convinced you that you saw something out there?
Well, let's talk about being right here, where we are, right here. I came down here with a fellow by the name of Dennis Bartow, who was an ex-Marine. Anyway, he was a raider. He was quite well schooled in the arts of survival. And we came down here together just to scope the place out and take a good look. And we had heard the so-called legends of Bigfoot down here. So I wanted to look over the territory. Because the heck with what people say, it's what you see and what you evaluate on your own.
Sure.
Okay. So Dennis come in, he said, I have to apologize to you. He said, I have to bring my young son. He was about 7 years old along. And I thought, well, so the poor little kid, why not? So we came down here, and we were talking about the Bigfoot and the sighting that I had reported earlier, that I'd seen a large, it looked like a large hairy hominid on the other side of this lagoon. So I was describing this to it, and the little boy kept saying, Dad, look what I found, look what I found. And, of course, here we are in the middle of a film, and Dad, and he kept brushing the kid off. And he said, no, Dad, look what I found. I found something really special. And we were getting ready to string between two trees. We were going to put up dried fish. This was a test to see what would happen. And the kid kept it up. Well, I knew from an early age what it was like to be ignored as a kid. I couldn't take it. So I went over, and the kid had found the carcass of a pheasant. So we made a fuss over the thing, and he took some feathers and all that. So, okay, now we get on with the interview. And it was over. Came back, and we hung up, I think it was 7 pieces of dried fish in between two trees. We went out, we spent the evening someplace else, came back, I think it was a day or day and a half. All the pieces were gone.
About how high up are they hung?
About 5-6 feet up.
Okay.
But underneath each one was stuck a feather. Now, if a wolf or a coyote or something like that had got it, you think they're going to stick a feather down there? And there were 7 up there, and there were 7 feathers. And we thought, now, what the heck is this? And we knew that we didn't go back. So that's when we realized that we had probably been under the observation of a Bigfoot or a family. And because there was evidence of them there. And what they had seen was this little boy had spent a lot of time with a carcass of something they're familiar with, and it seemed important. So they took the food that we had laid out, but gave us the gift of those feathers from that pheasant.
A lot of people have experiences or encounters, but they seem to be afraid to come forward, or afraid that they might be ridiculed or made fun of. What would you advise them if they had an encounter? Would you even advise them to come forward?
Sure. Tell the truth. And if you tell the truth and someone, supposedly a friend, makes fun of you, they're not a friend.
Absolutely.
So ice them out.
For newer researchers or people just getting into the hobby, trying to go out and do some research, do you have any suggestions for them, what to keep an eye open for, what to look for, or what just to have a good time looking for Sasquatch?
Well, I published a book on those things, and they're probably still available somewhere.
Real quick, what's the name of the book?
Field Researcher Guide.
That's the yellow one, right? That's the one. That's a good one, by the way.
That's the one, because I laid it out pretty much step by step what you can do. Yeah. And if you follow that, you're pretty much covering all your bases. But the secret is, when you do make a contact, keep your mouth shut. Because other people will come down and they're going to try to make fun of you, or they're going to start planting things in. Yeah. So don't tell anyone where you're doing your research or where you're putting out what I call gifts.
Absolutely.
Keep it to yourself, because other people, for whatever reason, will do things like that.
Now, we're in Salt Fork State Park, Ohio. Mm-hmm. Are Bigfoots just in Ohio?
Oh, no.
Where else can we find them, you think?
Oh, my God. All over Pennsylvania, upstate New York, Quebec, Canada, and in the upper areas of Gaspé Peninsula, you'd find them there. You find them in Minnesota. You'll find them in North and South Dakota. You'll find them in Idaho. You find them in Washington.
So literally they can be anywhere, just about.
Take a look at the forested areas and try to look at it this way. If you were a well-trained ranger in the Army, but you had access to food that you could eat, and you had the proper food, clothing, could you survive? Well, hell yes. The average city people are so easy because when they're driving down the road, they're not looking for Bigfoot or anything like that. They're looking to stay alive. And farmers, they're too busy with their crops.
When we were talking about skeptics, I know that sometimes, a lot of the times, you say, just forget them, because if you know what you know, you saw what you saw. That's all that really matters.
Yeah.
Now, people that might have had an encounter and that are trying to come forward, or even getting into a conversation with a skeptic, per se, in your opinion, what would be some ammunition, per se, to dispute that something is out there?
Well, first of all, if you never want to try to convince someone who's closed-minded. It's not worth your breath, your heartbeats, or your time. Forget it. You know what you've seen. You know you don't have to share those things, except that someone, if they ask you and you tell them and they show interest, of course you tell them. You share with them. But every time you do, you're laying yourself open to someone who will tell it to someone else, and they'll go out and sandbag you with a bunch of junk. Keep it to yourself.
For us, where can we find your book or even more of your research?
Well, I haven't published recently on purpose, but if all you have to do is go online and you find it.
Type in your name, huh?
Yeah, type in the name Robert W. Author, and it'll pop up. And the publisher, in fact, the editor's here now. And we had a brief chat. Whether or not we're going to go on and expand it, we'll wait and see.
Well, there you have it, everybody. The infamous Mr. Robert Morgan here at the 2017 Ohio Bigfoot Conference. Again, thank you, sir. I appreciate the interview. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and you guys are lucky to have a guy like this to watch.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I am here at the 2017 Ohio Bigfoot Conference with the one and only Cliff Barrickman. Cliff, hunting you down all weekend, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this for me. Thank you so much. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, and you've been very, very persistent. I know that I can be almost as hard to find as a Sasquatch, so he's got me, though.
Cliff, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you started in getting into Bigfoot in general. Mm-hmm. You were a former teacher.
Yes.
My wife was a former teacher. You guys have a lot in common. It's hard doing that. How did you go from being a teacher to teaching big kids about Sasquatch?
Well, really, the first year or two of me being on the TV show was a little difficult because I was a full-time classroom teacher. So when we shot the pilot, for example, I think we shot that like at the very end of school when summer started. So I had to get my classroom cleaned up and get out and go film this thing. But then so the pilot was rather successful. The network bought the show. We had 6 episodes for first season, but that was going to be in February, if I remember. In February or March. I'd have to go back and check my notes. But nonetheless, I had to miss like 6 or 7 weeks of school. So that actually was quite difficult. I got a long-term sub. My students were very understanding, but also really excited for me and thrilled that their teacher had this opportunity as well. Because when you're a teacher, and you know this from your wife, of course, when you're a teacher, you're basically the matriarch or patriarch of a 30 unit tribe. You're like a family unit, so what happens to one affects everybody, and something good or bad happens, everybody participates in that celebration or remorse.
At what point did you come to a realization that there is something out there? There's more to it than just
That was back in the early 1990s. I've always been interested in Bigfoots, but kind of peripherally, as like a strange, unique, eccentric thing, you know. I loved monsters when I was a kid. But when I was in college, I had a few-hour break between classes, and so I would go to the library and just pick books off of the shelf and various subjects that I enjoyed learning about, mostly sciences, like astronomy and chemistry and stuff. But one day I found myself in the anthropology section, and I found a book that was a collection of scholarly articles written about Sasquatches from the perspective of cultural anthropologists and physical anthropologists. And when I started reading about the scientific work that had already been done by that point, I think this book was published in the 70s or something, late 70s, early 80s. When I read about the stuff that has already been done at that point on Sasquatches, I started realizing not only are Sasquatches funny and quirky and all this stuff I like and am, but they might be real as well. So I was already camping and backpacking, so I just kind of put that on the roster of things I was going to do out in the woods when I was there.
Now, you've been doing a lot of different types of research, really good stuff too. Coming from an academic background and then coming forth with this research, that had to have been kind of a hard thing to be like, hey, I believe that there is a Bigfoot out there. How did you handle that?
I just don't care what other people think, I mean, honestly, because the facts are the facts. I've always, like I said, I've always been eccentric. I've always been the outsider. I've always, I remember in high school, I would get notes from my writing teacher and stuff saying that, like, Cliff, you definitely are marching to the beat of your own drummer. I've always been the outlier, you know, so the fact that I was into Bigfoots and other people didn't know anything about them, it wasn't actually that unusual for me to be into something really cool, and they weren't, because I've always been that way. Like, I'm into something cool and you're not. And it's a little arrogant and weird and stuff like that, but like Bigfoots are cool. I mean, you can't argue that.
As a teacher, you've probably heard of something called an elevator speech. You got 30 seconds, you're locked in an elevator to basically sell yourself to somebody in there. If you're locked in that elevator with a skeptic or somebody that's just open-minded, what are your 30 seconds going to be filled with just to say, you know what, open your mind, there is something out there. What are your main speaking points?
Well, first of all, I don't try to convince skeptics. Okay. It just doesn't seem worth my time, honestly, because it's a matter of education. And skeptics don't like to hear that they're uneducated on a subject. They think they know more than me, for example. They think they know more about Bigfoots than I do because I know they're real, and they don't, and they know they're not. So why would I bother arguing with somebody? It's like arguing that the earth is flat. It's like a waste of time. I don't even engage. If they ask me questions, I'll be happy to answer them. But as far as convincing somebody, I could care less.
Absolutely. What would your advice be to new people getting into the hobby or becoming new researchers, just with open minds, wanting to get out there and find something? What's your advice to them?
It's really, I suppose, twofold. Number one, and most importantly, educate yourself. Read books. Don't educate yourself by watching YouTube videos and that sort of thing. There's a lot of junk and nonsense and hoaxers and liars and weirdos and people who are probably telling the truth but are just dead wrong out there on YouTube, okay? Read books by people with qualifications, either experience, like John Green, for example. He's a newspaper guy. He didn't have scientific academic qualifications, but he was a newspaper guy, so he had experience on his side, you know? Dr. Meldrum is a good example. He has the academics on his side, you know? He knows what he's talking about as far as anatomy. So read books. Educate yourself on the subject. Number two, enjoy it. And that's probably the most important thing of all, because anybody can Bigfoot, whether you like to read books or not. Anybody can go Bigfooting, because Bigfooting is basically camping with a purpose. So go out there with the goal of enjoying the woods. Don't go out there just to film or see a Bigfoot, because you're going to be disappointed almost every time you go. Pretty much every time you go, you're going to be disappointed if that's your goal. But if you go to the woods because you like the woods and you like to camp, or you like the people you're going camping with, and maybe Bigfoots will be there, you'll be stoked every single time because you'll be successful.
People that might have had an encounter or an experience that might be a little bashful or reluctant to come forth because they're afraid of ridicule or whatnot, what would you say to them, and how do they come forward if they have a story to tell?
Well, first of all, it's okay, because you are not alone. You are just one of thousands, literally thousands upon thousands of people who have had a very special experience and observation. Your observations might be useful if you've seen one of these things. So I would encourage you to share. There's plenty of groups out there. Like I've got a website. You're more than welcome to report it to me, cliffberrickman.com, and I guarantee you I will never share your name with anybody unless I have permission to, basically. You know, if you want to speak to an investigator of mine, you are welcome to do so. But they have instructions to never publish a name. So you don't have to come out and be in the public eye about a sighting anymore, as far as I'm concerned. If there's a name attached in my files, good, I get to speak to that person or whatever. But the public will never, ever know. But what if you have an observation of a Sasquatch doing something that really no one has seen before? Or maybe 6 or 7 people have seen but aren't willing to share. That's information we don't have that we could learn something from. So I would encourage the sharing of information, because that's kind of what science is about in a way. Learn something, publish it, and then see what other people have to say about it. If you saw Sasquatch do something unusual, we put that out there, or maybe I'm aware of it. Maybe if I hear somebody else say the same thing, there's 2 or 3 data hits all of a sudden, and oh, that's a Sasquatch behavior. We can add that one to the books too. So don't be bashful. You're not alone. It's okay. They're real. You can see these things, and you're not crazy. You're not hallucinating or anything like that. It's okay. You saw one. Tell me about it. Love to hear it.
Cliff, us at home, how do we learn more about you and your research and what you're doing?
Well, of course, I think my website and my blog basically are probably some of the best ways to learn about what I'm up to. CliffBerrickman.com. Just look up Cliff Bigfoot on Google and it'll go right to my site, guaranteed. I've got Facebook, I've got Twitter, I've got all that junk too. So if you're interested in what I'm up to or what I'm interested in, check out any of my social media sites, check out my websites, email me. It goes right to me and no one else. So be patient for a reply.
There you have it, everybody. Cliff Berrickman at the 2017 Ohio Bigfoot Conference. Cliff, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
With the thousands of reported sightings worldwide and an impressive array of physical evidence, many people still argue the existence of Bigfoot. While some of these reports might be considered hoaxes or misidentifications of animals, I'm left asking myself, out of the hundreds of thousands of reports worldwide, over the span of hundreds of years, can they all be fake? Regardless, I think it's important to say that whether or not you are a believer in Bigfoot, one can't deny the vastness of unexplored wilderness in our world. And sometimes it's just easier to believe that something doesn't exist, but it's a lot harder to prove it. And maybe, just maybe, one day, our society will be one brave exploration away from finding the truth. I'm Kevin Patrick, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Wild Villa Park.